Afternoon, guys. Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School, coming to you from South Florida. I wanted to add another video today to our video series on useful and medicinal plants of the eastern woodlands. We're down in the southeast now in Florida, and cypress is one of the most prevalent trees in the state of Florida. It covers 1.6 million acres of Florida are covered in cypress. So it's a very prevalent tree. It's also a very useful tree. I'd like to talk to you about it a little bit right now. Any place that you have cypress growing heavy in a swampy or a watershed area, the water is going to be very dark in color because the cypress tree is high in tannin. Because of that, that water is going to be both astringent and it's going to be antiseptic. So just the water that the cypress grows in is a good medicinal wash externally. The one thing that I've read about cypress that makes it a little bit unique is they say that cypress is the one best tree in the eastern woodlands, period, for stopping bleeding. Now, to do that, you need to make a tea, and that's a wash. But they say that the roots and the bark are not the way to do that. They say to use the cones for that. And the cypress tree has cones on it, very similar to a pine. They're a little higher up in the tree right now, and they're hard to reach. Certain times of the year, they're a little bit lower and easier to get to. Right now, you kind of have to shimmy up one of these things to get the cones. But you take those cones and you make a medicinal tea or infusion, where you just heat the water up and steep the cones for 20 to 30 minutes in that tea solution, and then pouring that onto a wound or gargling or swishing it around in your mouth is supposed to be very good for things like gingivitis, any kind of bleeding of the gums, any external bleeding that you have is supposed to stop very quickly. So it's a very good tree for stopping bleeding. We've talked about yarrow being like the #1 plant to stop bleeding, and cypress is the #1 tree for that. So it has a lot of uses both externally and internally. And internally, I mean within the mouth. Now, you can also take it internally for bleeding of the stomach if you have a bleeding ulcer, something like that. You can also take it internally as a tea, and it will help alleviate that type bleeding as well. But it's very good in the fact that it grows so prevalent in the water areas of Florida that that water is usually very dark with tannin. That in itself is an antiseptic wash that you really don't have to process. It's already there. Then you can process the cones of this to make a more medicinal type tea that you can use to stop bleeding in the mouth, cuts and scrapes, things of that nature, or internally. So I'm going to walk you around for a minute. We're going to look at a couple different cypress trees, give you a little better look at what they look like, what the bark looks like, what a cypress knee is, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Stay with me, guys. Okay, this little hump sticking up out of the ground right here, there's one here and there's one right over here beside it. If I can get both of those in the camera or not. There's one right here as well. Those are cypress knees. Nobody really knows exactly what they're used for. There's been speculation they're part of the root system of the cypress tree. There's been speculation that they help stabilize it in loose soil. There's also been speculation that they bring oxygen to the tree somehow, because generally speaking, they'll be exposed and up in the air out of the water or up out of the mud. As you can see, these two here are prevalent, sticking up. Now, there's no cypress tree real close to this. The nearest cypress tree is actually behind it. Right here is the nearest cypress tree to those two knees. So those root system knees can be pretty far away from the cypress tree, or they can be pretty close to it. This will give you a little bit better close-up view of what the cypress looks like as far as a trunk. This is a small one. The cypress tree is actually the largest tree east of the Rocky Mountains. So it's a very big tree, very majestic. These are all small ones that we're looking at right now because I wanted to give you a real up-close view of what a small one looks like, because the big ones aren't much different than this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys a couple different trees, and we'll look at, here's a good example of one right here. And I'm going to kind of go ahead and raise up that thing. It looks a lot like a pine when you get up higher in the tree. It does have needles on it. You can see these are what the cypress needles look like, or the cypress look like, just like almost like a small pine type needle, and they're laying all over the ground out here. And then the root system is split and furrowed real heavily like that, and the bark of this tree is also very pine-like in the sense that it kind of peels off, and you can see it peeling off. So it's a pretty easy tree to identify. You just have to look at the big, heavy furrowed root system, and you'll know you've got a cypress. They usually grow, quite a few of them around each other, and usually around, well, almost always around a wetland area. Guys, I appreciate you joining me for this video on the Woodlands Cypress down here in South Florida. I'm Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. I appreciate what you do for me, for my family, for my business. We'll be back with another video very soon. Thank you very much.
Hey, I'm country, backwoods and hungry. I spend every Sunday just living good. Might do a little fishing, a little hunting on the weekend. With a bow I'll be sneaking back in the woods. A little bit crazy, every now and then maybe. Like to kick off my boots and get lazy, but I'm living good, yeah. Hey, I'm living good, just a redneck Robin Hood. Hey, I'm living good back in the woods.